Well, hey guys, and welcome back to our weekly show, Ask an Autistic. My name is Jessica Leichtweisz. If you don't know who I am, I'm the CEO of Hope Education Services. I've been working with kids. Now, I've been saying for 12 years for the last, I don't know, year, but I think actually we're coming on 13 years. I've been working with children with autism. Next month will be 13 years. And what I've gained is a lot of insight and wisdom and how to teach children effectively, how to help with behaviors, how to talk to parents. But what I could never really ever experience is firsthand what it's like to have autism. And I truly believe from my bottom of my heart that if parents fully want to understand autism, listening to autistic adults is the only way to do that. So I'm proud to bring you every week Ask an Autistic, where we've assembled a panel of an amazing autistic adults who are here to answer parent questions every week. So enough from me. Without further delay, I want to invite the parents that are on here to unmute and ask your questions to the panel.
So I've been watching these series for the past week. I think one night I stayed up till 4 a.m. watching all these videos. And I got to say thank you to everybody listening, because this has made me feel a lot more comforting. My son is 3 years old, just got diagnosed ASD, high functioning. And, you know, the biggest fear me and my wife has is the future and what the future holds, how his social life is going to be impacted. But one of the things we were talking and we just couldn't agree on was, and I want to ask the panel, should my son come with a, well, she likes to call it a warning label. I just kind of like making it a disclosure. For instance, we had a group of friends where they were all their kids were neurotypical. We have a neurotypical daughter who's about to be 5 as well. And I just wanted to know, is it appropriate for me to go and say, hey, listen, we can have a play date? Because, you know, we have a lot of friends that are our age. They have kids that are similar in age as well. And is it okay? Is it appropriate or not? Do you think it's something maybe in the future my son would appreciate, just so that everybody knows that in case he's throwing a tantrum or if he lines things up, that's just his way of comforting himself? Because every time he goes into a new atmosphere, a new home, he has to line things up, ABCs, that kind of stuff. But I just want to know whether is it something that I should tell a parent ahead of time? Hey, I just want to let you know, full disclosure, my son is autistic and he has certain quirks to him that he needs in order for him to feel comfortable. I just want to give you the heads up in case you think that he's just a misbehaved child. So my question to the panel is that my wife doesn't want to. She's just more along the lines of, well, if they don't want to play with if we have to disclose that to them, then we shouldn't be friends and or let our children play with their children, because then it's just going to create a lot of tension between the adults as well. And I agree. However, I'm more along the lines of, well, I think we can let them know ahead of time, hey, listen, I'd like to let you know that, you know, he has his quirks. There's certain things that, you know, it's not things you see in normal children, or not normal, I'm sorry, neurotypical children, and the way they play, because he tends to like have his own, you know, he's in his own little world. He likes to play the way he likes to play. And most children get upset with that because he'll take their toys and start lining them up, and the kids won't want to do that. So my question to everybody is, should or should we not disclose? And if you say we should, how should we do it so that we're not putting ourselves in an awkward position?
Yeah, Rich, that's a fantastic question. It's one that I get all the time. And I know what I respond as, and I usually interject my opinion in things. But before I do that, I want to hear from the panel. I know most of the panelists, especially I don't know if anyone here, I know we do have Monica here was diagnosed as an adult, but a lot of times when adults find out they are autistic, they say they are happy to have a definition for who they are or a label for what's been going on in their life. But I haven't had anyone ask it in that way to the panel yet, of saying, you know, should we tell people when my child's younger? I know my opinion and I'll share it, but I want to hear from the panelists first. Kevin beat Michele today by like a split second in getting on. So Kevin, go first.
So, all right. It's a good question, interesting question to, you know, think about. A good question, something like what we talked about last week, about not last week, but one of our recent shows, about whether or not we should disclose. And I would say overall there's probably no necessarily right or wrong answer. I mean, I think it all depends on the situation and the and like the people, your situation, as in like how serious and significant are his behaviors, and and what people he's going to be, you know, interacting with on these play dates, and how you think the people who he's interacting with, how you think they're going to perceive and interpret his behaviors, and you know, like how well will they be at dealing with his differences in behavior. So I think you got to take all three of those things into account. So it's very, very situational there. And overall, I would err on the side of, generally, I think, well, an argument can be made either way, because I kind of advocated for disclosure, just because, you know, then it feels like you're not throwing, you know, them to the wolves with, you know, with, if he does have a tantrum, you know, like, why is he having a tantrum, and how do we deal with it, you know? So I kind of am a little bit on the side of disclosure there. But I also, for people who would have concerns about disclosure, I understand that too, because sometimes as soon as you give your kid that label, there comes with some preconceived notions and stereotypes that are more probably bad stereotypes than good stereotypes. So I understand concerns with disclosure there too. So, and really, how would I disclose it? If I would disclose it, I think you really said about pretty much how I would do it. I would talk with, like, the parents of the kids he's going to be going on a play date with, and, like, explaining, you know, like, things, try to get them to understand what some of his triggers are, I think, and, like, how we can maybe avoid those triggers, like triggers of explaining to the parents some of the triggers might help them be proactive with avoiding some of those triggers that might just cause them to have, like, a tantrum or meltdown, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, and pretty much, yeah, that's how I would disclose it in that kind of way. And really, if I were to disclose it, that's how I would do it. And whether or not to disclose it, I think really you got to use your judgment on you know, how you think he's going to, you know, respond to the environment he's in, your son, how you think your son's going to respond to the environment he's in, and also how the people are going to who he's interacting with are going to respond to him.
Yeah, that's really great, Kevin. And I like how you're talking about the fact that information can prevent a problem. And it's not even a problem for the other person, it's a problem for your child. Because the reality of it is that autistic children play differently, and there's certain things that you probably do as a parent you don't realize that other parents don't necessarily do for their child. You know, so things like, for example, like, if a parent has a play date, by 3, oftentimes children are playing alone. By 3, there's a very big gap between what children who are neurotypical and children who are autistic are playing with. So typically speaking, by a time a child is 3, from a professional developmental perspective, they're about 18 months behind on average, which means that toys and activities may be very far from a child's reach at that age. And then the other thing to think about is just that children that are autistic require more structured play, whereas, like, neurotypical children are very open-ended in play. So in the event that you don't say anything, and then you just have a free-for-all in terms of play, you know, it's very possible, and not only very possible, but almost certain, your child wouldn't be able to play in the way that a typical 3-year-old is playing. And at that point, you're setting your child up for failure. So it's not about the label in terms of, like, a warning label. It's more thinking about what accommodations your child needs to be successful, and how you have to communicate those accommodations to another person to make sure your child can have those experiences. Because an autistic child can play with a neurotypical 3-year-old, but the types of activities they do may have to vary from what a neurotypical child would do with another neurotypical child. So, you know, you can't kind of just say, like, oh, we'll just play together, because the truth is that autistic children tend to not know how to play in the same way, or tend to choose to not play in the same way as a neurotypical child. So finding a mutual activity is very, very important. And that's not even just for 3-year-olds, but for example, I am going to be working with a 14-year-old and a 13-year-old and integrating, like, a play date between them. And it's going to be done virtually with COVID. But I'm actually talking to the other practitioner ahead of time to find out what are the child's strengths, What are their child's weaknesses? What are the child's limitations? You know, what are the child's interests? To make sure we can structure an activity that both of them can do. So information can be very important. And I think it's important to look at it less as a label and more as information to make sure your child's successful. Because an autistic child does need accommodations, and the younger they are, the more accommodations they tend to need. So without those accommodations being in place, and oftentimes I feel like it's a parent's thing to get over the label. It's not the child's thing, right? The child doesn't know at 3 years old that they're being labeled as autistic. The parent knows that. So it's the parent that kind of has to, and for a lack of better terms, and as horrible as this is going to sound and insensitive, the truth is just kind of get over themselves and realizing that it's not about how they're perceiving their child's diagnosis and more what their child needs to be successful and what information other people that are interacting with their child need to know to make sure their child's successful. And I know that sounds insensitive, but that's really what it comes down to, is oftentimes the idea of a stigma. It doesn't come from children, it comes from adults. It's not so much the children perceive a stigma, it's that the adults perceive that their child is being viewed differently, and the adults internalize that more than the child internalizes that. Because the reality of it is the child who's autistic already feels and knows that they're different, whether or not you assign a label to it. So Michele, I see you shaking your head yes and no, and I'm excited to hear your opinion and your take on this.
Thanks, Jessica. So with this, I would say that like there's definitely, I agree with both you and Kevin, because I'm seeing a lot that like, yeah, don't pay attention. It's not like, we're not supposed to be putting labels. Like labels are for kids, not for people. I've heard this saying like a lot, and I just, I think that's what's really important, is that just coming together as a community, like less of the stigma, and just with more about with just how can I put it? Just like communication is just so important, just to prevent like any issues that arise and stuff, and just with play dates, like finding things that like the kids have in common. It's not about like it's not too much about like what's happening. Yes, accommodations that should be needed, of course. Like there's going to be times like where the environment, like one place at a play date might be too much, so like maybe going to like some part of a house or something, like a quiet area like to play would be like good, like such as a basement. Like I'm always in my basement and stuff, so it's like a good space to like live calm and like to be able to play and everything. And just like for the parents, like I think they need to just start to realize that with our world today, that there's going to be more kinds of people, and then just that we need to just be accepting and just continue to educate like what's going on in terms about with autism, and just get to know the child for themselves. So that would be like my response for this one.
Yeah, that's a good point, Michele. Like you don't necessarily have to say like, hey, my child's autistic, because the reality of it is most people don't know what autism is. That's why we're putting out our book, This is Autism, and we're telling everybody like, watch it, right? Because when people think about autism, the truth is they think about Rain Man and The Good Doctor. That's what they think about when they think about autism.
Yeah.
And that's it. And yeah, what was that other new one that just came out with that guy in high school?
Love on the Spectrum.
Yes.
Atypical, right?
Yeah, that's what they think about. That's the reality. Most people aren't going to know what you mean when you say my child's autistic, right? Until like the truth is for me, having grown up in a small rural community, I had never even, I think there were, like looking back now, knowing what autism is, autistic children in my school, but they were like in their own classroom. They didn't interact with me in any way. And so I didn't know what autism was until I was a senior in college, literally. Atypical, Rich. Yeah, thank you, Rich. Atypical. That's what people think about, right? When they think about autism, and they're thinking about media. You don't need to say like, hey, my child's autistic, but you do need to communicate my child may play differently. My child may engage in these behaviors. You may need to, and the truth is by the time a child is 3, children also perceive other children's behaviors. So a parent may have to prepare even a 3-year-old on how to play with another child. So if you say to, and it's just like if you have a child, let's just say that is very, very triggered, let's say by numbers and letters, because that's a common one. And then the parent has no idea and they bring out a number puzzle, and you know that your child will have an epic meltdown if they can't move past those numbers, right? If you don't convey that information ahead of time, you're going to have a problem. So it's not about the label. It's not about like a warning. It's about how can I set my child up for success? And I truly believe that, like, you know, Michele said, labels are for canned. It's not about the label. It's not about warning the other person, or like, it's not about really like trying to make the other adult more comfortable in the presence of your child. It's trying to set your child up for success. The only way you're going to set your child up for success is conveying what he needs to be successful. So you don't have to say like, hey, my child's autistic, but you do have to convey what your child needs to be successful if you think that they can't be successful without those things in place. That's my perspective on it. And Michele, that's a really, really great point.
Thank you.
Jesse, you're up next. I'd love to hear your take on this.
I certainly believe in lifelong disclosure. I'd like to believe at my age I've mastered the art of being an adult, and at least trying to exist in the adult world without problems. But there's always going to be problems and misunderstandings. They're going to last the rest of my life. And disclosing is just a way of saying, if I do something that makes you uncomfortable or creeps you out, there could be a rational explanation behind it. And just tell me nicely that there's a problem. I do not even want to imagine what it would be like if you just throw a child into a play date with all of their triggers, behaviors, and another parent is not aware of that. And then it's not fair to the parent when the child has an epic meltdown, as you said, and they don't know what to do, and they don't know what's wrong. I mean, for example, I read a book called Anthony Best, and the child would scream every time someone called him Tony instead of Anthony. And I could relate to those triggers, because that's what I want to do when someone spells my first name as Jessie. I want to scream and say, what is wrong with you? It's on Facebook. It's 5 letters. And I just think of how hard it is to control myself when people are that careless and thoughtless. As an adult, I think it's not fair to put those expectations on a child to just get used to the neurotypical world. But it should be explained to the parent that the child should not be coddled, and they should understand boundaries. For example, if the child is rummaging through the family's personal belongings and throwing CDs on the floor and just acting like it's their own home, then it can be emphasized that they have every right to say, this is not your house, this is not appropriate. If they keep doing it, then there could be consequences, such as, if you don't stop, I have no choice but to tell your mother, and maybe you won't be able to come back for a little while. Just to emphasize that there is a consequence, but it's not forever. And I definitely, if there's a huge trigger, a family should know about it, just so they at least do not do it on purpose, and to give that family a fighting chance to avoid these meltdowns.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, Jesse. I could kind of tell from your voice, you were that kid that threw CDs around, weren't you?
Well, not quite throwing CDs around, but I remember talking nonstop about how much of an idiot the first George Bush was during the election. And I remember the family was just quiet in the car. They just let me ramble about nothing and nonsense. Another time I was repeating a news story that my mother told me about the director of the movie Powder and how he was a child molester, and I was saying that in the car, and I just remember everyone being silent, and that moment haunts me, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life, just knowing in retrospect how damn uncomfortable they were that I was talking about child molestation and just out of the blue. I don't know why I was talking about that subject. And the last thing I did that created havoc is I was obsessed with video games. So if another playmate had a Nintendo in his basement, I would go nuts, and they could not get me away from that. So it's good to kind of work these things out beforehand and learn what to talk about and what not to talk about, and to also get a report from the families about what honestly went right and what went wrong. So because a child must be trained to exist in the neurotypical world, and it's best to nip these catastrophes in the bud before they go out and get a real job.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, Jesse. And hopefully Facebook doesn't censor our video for talking about those things. But absolutely, I mean, as you talk about, like on play dates, things can go wrong. So it's important to like set it up for success. And the thing about it is that a child, if something goes wrong one time, you don't want to cut off all ties for the future as well. And like Jesse, you said, like those play dates didn't go perfectly, but sometimes like if there's conversation and understanding, people are more accepting and willing to give a second chance. Like Jesse, in your perspective, when you were engaging in those conversations that you now believe were inappropriate, and now you were uncomfortable and you made the other person uncomfortable, did they know at the time that you were autistic, or did you at the time, did they not know that? And did that maybe they contribute to making it more uncomfortable?
I believe that they knew there was something wrong, but at the same time, I was not officially diagnosed until the age of 14. And autism was not as prevalent as it is now. There were no mild cases, just children with behavioral problems, or they were diagnosed with ADHD at the time.
Yeah. So do you feel like it would have been better for you when you were in that car if the person who was in that car would have known that you're autistic and maybe have expected you to have an interest that were different than theirs, or not necessarily being aware of when they weren't comfortable in the conversation? Like if you could go back and change it, would you want that person at that time, knowing who you are today, knowing what you went through at that moment, would you have wanted that person in that car to know that, you know what, Jesse Saperstein is autistic and he's a great person, has a great heart, but he may occasionally make mistakes, and give him some grace?
Exactly. There has to be discipline, but also the understanding that kids are going to be kids, and due to the undeveloped prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for impulse control, it's inevitable that there's going to be some gaffes along the way. And I always say that when you insist on solving a problem and trying to make it perfect, you'll solve that problem but create countless more problems. And there are times, in my opinion, where in which humor and even inappropriate behavior are actually appropriate. There are times when it is appropriate to be inappropriate. I don't know if anyone agrees with that. I remember a time when I was allowed to read a poem about Bill Clinton getting into a duel with Lorena Bobbitt in the White House, and I read that in front of my U.S. history class with the teacher's permission. Everybody went nuts with convulsive laughter, and at that time, it was appropriate to read something so raunchy. I always say that it's good to ask permission and warn people about such plans, meaning that if you have a joke that you think is funny but could be inappropriate, just ask beforehand and get a second or a fourth opinion. I once prevented myself from making a complete fool of myself at a Temple Grandin seminar just by asking other people for their opinions and expunging myself of any responsibility if they all said it was okay. You see, when the Temple Grandin movie came out on HBO, my father saw the trailer and he said, "Damn, that Temple Grandin's really hot." And I said, "Dad, that's not really Temple Grandin. That's a glamorous actress pretending to be her in a movie. And I was going to tell that anecdote in front of hundreds of people at Hobart and William Smith colleges before introducing the real Temple Grandin. And I was going to say the real Temple Grandin is much hotter. And they told me that's not appropriate. Do not say that. And I was able to avert a disaster. I think that children should be encouraged to ask questions, and adults should be put in their place if they say to the child, that is not appropriate. How could you even think of doing that? You should know better. They should be treated like a hero and praised for at least asking beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, Jesse, what we're all getting from this is that the more information we have ahead of time, the better choices can be. So that's definitely very helpful. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So Lisa, I see you putting like some really helpful comments in the chat. And I know, so this is kind of like a private webinar. So everybody except Rich and Lisa will be watching this on YouTube because our link expired today. And I didn't realize that until about a half hour ago. So I happen to know Rich and Lisa personally. So thank you guys both for being here. And Lisa is, if Rich, you don't know, and I know if anyone watching this video doesn't know, Lisa is actually a very popular mama blogger. Her blog is Mama AF, and she's just a little further along in her autism journey. Her son is, I think it is 6 now, right, Lisa? 4? Is he 4? 5? I can't see your fingers. All right, well, okay, why don't you come out and I know you had some advice on how you shared about your son, really just how you communicated to his peers and to some of the people that you live with. So maybe Rich can kind of hear from you what you did and what worked and what didn't work and why you decided to do that.
Yeah, so we've been on this journey for about a year, maybe about a year and a half. My son was diagnosed last March 2019. So we've definitely been in this situation, and my husband and I have had the same exact conversation. Because until my son can tell me what he prefers, we have to kind of make the decisions that we think are best and will benefit him. And so typically I tend to lean towards not disclosing. And the reason isn't to avoid the label or anything. It's really just to eliminate any preconceived notions or ideas about what autism is, because I've seen the show Atypical, and you know, if 500,000 Americans have seen that, they might think everyone who's autistic is just like the main character in that show, and that's not necessarily the case. And so I usually only bring it up whenever there is something going on. So a perfect example, we moved into a new house. Our next door neighbor also had a 4-year-old son who's neurotypical, and my son didn't want to play with him, and they were all very confused, the whole family. And so I explained to them, like, oh, Talon is autistic, you know, he just plays a little differently, so he might want to play alongside you, but he might not understand the game. Can you explain it to him? And talking to both the child and the parent about it, I think is important. And usually what I find myself doing is trying to control the situation as best as you can. So controlling the play date as much as you can, having the play dates at your house, or picking the play place that you go to. If you know Chuck E. Cheese drives your child insane, be like, oh, let's go to, I don't know, the trampoline park or something instead, something that they might enjoy a little bit better. And not to come across as difficult, but then it's like you're still making a suggestion, but it's, you know, going to be a little more tolerable or beneficial for your child. So that's kind of where I tend to come from. But depending on the situation, I also use it as an opportunity to educate other people about autism. And I will admit, just like I did in the chat, I honestly don't think I heard the word autism until I was pregnant 5 years ago, which is embarrassing to say, but if you're not told, you don't know, like, you don't know it's research. So there have been some families who have been unpleasant when I have disclosed that my child is autistic. And I have been declined play dates because my son is autistic, and those are not people that I necessarily want my son to play with, because I just, you know, that's a personal choice. But the more you educate, the more some people tend to come around, because sometimes the unknown is scary for other people. And if they have a preconceived notion of what autism looks like, it might scare them a bit. So educating, informing, and preparing, I think, are kind of the way to go about it.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing that. And I think I said, like, I think it's not about the other adults. I mean, the other adult is an adult, right? They like should have the coping mechanisms. They're an adult, and especially if, you know, if they're neurotypical, they really should have the coping mechanisms to deal with a child, or to help it, to support a child. So if an adult chooses to just be a bad human and say, my child can't play with your child because your child plays differently, then it's not something, like you said, you want your child playing with anyway. So certainly if someone rejects your child on the basis of their diagnosis, yeah, that's someone who you don't want in your life. But it's like it's about your child being successful, and, you know, conveying whatever you need another person to know for your child being successful. And just like you said, Lisa, like, well, you know what, my child, and you don't have to say like, well, my child's autistic and he's going to have a sensory overload at Chuck E. Cheese. Can we go to the zoo? You can just say, you know what, my son really doesn't like Chuck E. Cheese, but I would really love to go on a play date with you. Do you think we could go to the zoo instead? You don't have to like have this big elaboration of like, well, my child has, you know, autism, and that means he has sensory processing disorder, which means his neurotransmitters overfire, which means he has a sensory overload when he's like, when he has too many visual, and you don't need to go into that, right? You don't need like to justify or explain yourself. Sometimes it's enough to just say like, my kid doesn't like it there. Can we go someplace else? Because I'd love to see you and I'd love for kids to play together. But I don't think my child's going to do really well there. And that's enough of an explanation. And anybody who's a like good human, not even a good parent, but just a good human, like should just accept that as an explanation and not insist you go to Chuck E. Cheese. I mean, I've heard they have really good pizza, but you know, you shouldn't insist on Chuck E. Cheese. You should kind of just go where the kids want to go. So that's a great point. Thank you, Lisa. So Jeff, you are up next, and I'm actually really excited to hear Jeff's perspective. I always say to every week, and I hope, Jeff, that you take this as a compliment, that Jeff is like, to me, he's like the wise owl on Winnie the Pooh, where I just love to hear him speak, and I gather so much wisdom from him.
Well, I will say one thing that might be a good introduction to kind of help parents of other children in anticipation for a play date. There's a show, there's a cartoon that came out of the UK a couple of years ago. It's called Pablo, and Pablo is it's a show about a kid with a 5-year-old boy with autism, and he goes into these imaginary worlds with various animal characters. Like there's a bird named Wren who does a lot of flapping and does a lot of singing. There's a dinosaur named Noah who's really sensitive and does a lot of stimming. There's also Tang, who has a lot of energy. There's a giraffe character who tends to talk a lot. And then there's also a mouse character who likes things quiet. And then there's a llama who communicates through echolalia. And I think a show like Pablo would, in a sense, kind of introduce the child's playdate's parents to what is going to happen, what the child is going to encounter. And then the other thing is that I would not use the word autism to the child's playdate's parents. Forgive me if I misworded it wrong, but I would probably just say something like, you know, specially gifted or thinks differently. Because if you listen to the theme song of Pablo, it's very clearly stated. Pablo thinks differently and sees the world in different ways. And I think introducing a show like Pablo to someone who's going to be on a play date with a child with autism, or even teenagers and adults with autism, I think is a good introduction, because what they're going to experience with social interaction with someone on the spectrum is clearly emphasized on this one cartoon.
Yeah, that's some great advice. And I actually just looked it up while you're talking, because I saw in the chat, Lisa asked, where can I watch this? And I want to know where to watch it too. It looks like it's on Netflix. So I put a link into the chat if anyone wants to check it out. It looks like it's actually pretty, like,
probably not Canadian Netflix.
Maybe not, but
and actually there's another show that is on YouTube. It was way back in the 90s, but it teaches about, like, you know, basic life lessons and social interactions. It's called Adventures in Wonderland. It was an old 90s show that used to air on the Disney Channel. And I don't know if you're familiar with Elizabeth Hanoi from CSI, but she plays the role of Alice. And Alice goes into Wonderland and encounters all her, like, you know, friends from Wonderland, like the White Rabbit, the Queen of Hearts, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, the March Hare, the Mad Hatter. And it's the interactions between those characters that is very good prime example of what the child is going to go through when he gets older. So
yeah, that's some really good advice. I remember that show from when I was a child, because I did grow up in the 90s. So Monica, we'll have to have a watch party if so we can watch it together with you if you can't get it in Canada. But I would encourage parents to check it out. And also, just if you have a sibling of a child, if you have more than one child and one is neurotypical, that looks like a really great show to actually help your neurotypical child understand their sibling as well. Because I think that that's an important conversation to have, which I know can be a whole nother topic of how to approach autism with siblings. That could be a whole nother conversation. Maybe we'll cover that next week. I'm starting to think we need to do this show every day, because I actually, like, have and even I have, like, a list now of questions I want to ask. And parents, Monica's shaking her head no. That's because she lives somewhere where it's really hard to get internet. Otherwise, I know she loves to be here. But so Monica, I'm going to make you go before Aidan today. So Monica, what is your take on this topic?
Jess, I love you and I disagree with you.
Yeah.
So,
we disagree a lot, but we love each other, which is all about, like, diversity, right? We accept each other and love each other for who we are.
yeah. So the whole 18 months behind in play thing at 3 years old is a huge overgeneralization. And I think that can be a hindrance to preventing diagnosis for kids that aren't 18 months behind. And I think that it also can be scary for parents, because if they're 18 months behind at 3, what are they going to be at 5? And so I don't think that's accurate. Even if it's an average, I still don't think that it's fair to use an average for such a huge population. Also, I wanted to just touch quickly on the fact that tantrums and meltdowns aren't the same thing. So we talked a little bit about that last week, and I just want to bring that back. Not last week, 2 weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about tantrums and how to handle meltdowns and stuff. Tantrums and meltdowns aren't the same thing. A tantrum is like, I'm not getting my way and I want my way and I'm mad at you. A meltdown is like, I cannot cope with what's happening in my environment right now, and I've lost control of my emotions and my body, and I can't cope and I need support, not punishment. I think that Lisa's on the right track. I was bobbing my bun. I am in agreement there. I think that information for the purpose of awareness, advocacy, and education is good. I don't think that like before you head to your first play date, hey, my kid's autistic, is the best way to go about that, because of the misconceptions and the misinformation and the undereducation, there can be an image created of who your child is before they've even met your child. And that's something I would never want for myself. I'm 28 and I'm still not openly autistic. Like, my close network knows, and then people that I don't know. But all those people in the middle, they have no idea that I'm autistic. Because I think that it is more important to build a relationship with someone and they get to know you, and then you can be like, hey, you're weird. And you can be like, yeah, because I'm autistic. Aside, so my best friend's daughter is 15 and I help take care of them. And she was really upset the other day because one of her friends called me weird. Like, she was crying in the car on the way home. She's like, Bethany said you're weird. And I was like, Grace, baby, I am weird. It's okay. And she was laughing about it. But anyways, I think that though the idea of a warning is unnecessary or ineffective. It's not going to have the desired outcome of like awareness or increased tolerance like we want it to most of the time. Maybe you have an amazing play date match that you're like, hey, my kid's autistic. And they're like, oh, that's so great to know. My nephew's autistic and maybe we should get them together too sometime. Or like, the chances of it going that way are far rarer than the other of it just, oh my goodness, this bun is out of control. And I think that another thing Lisa said that I had already written down in my notes here was set them up for success by choosing the location, the time, the activity, those kinds of things, kind of incognito. So if they plan the play, if they're like, hey, let's get together for a play date, you can be like, oh yeah, let's arrange it. Thursday afternoon at 4 works for me, because they're not going to be hangry at 4. And do you want to head to the zoo? Rich said that his son likes the zoo. Or if you can kind of like incognito plan something that's going to go really well, and they get to know your kid and they see how amazing your kid is before you're like, hey, my kid's autistic, you'll have more chances of decreasing stigma, because now they know an autistic person before they know the person's autistic.
That's like deep. I'm going to quote you on that on my Instagram.
Okay.
I'm going to put that on there. I like that. I really like that. And I love you. And we don't always agree on things, but I also know I don't know everything, which is why I have an entire team of adults here backing me up. I always do the best I can, but I learn from this panel every week as well. I have actually changed some of the things that I do, and I listen as well as just kind of like professing my opinion. And anyone who actually watches my YouTube channel, if you go back to the videos I made 2-3 years ago, my opinions have very much changed.
And I've helped you edit some of those things and talk through some of those things. And I have a lot of respect for your willingness to learn and engage with the autistic community and not just be a neurotypical know-it-all.
Yeah. Well, I know I don't know everything. So I appreciate you. And I always learn from you. Thank you for sharing. Aidan, so if those of you who don't know, Aidan and I are putting a book out together. It is going to be released August 8th. Everybody here on the panel is going to be a contributor in the book.
Yes.
And it is called This is Autism. It is basically just a very honest, very unfiltered assessment of what autism is to adults. And it's really intended for parents to understand their children and also for society to understand autism. I actually did get to go today and read the entire book, and I was very, very touched by everyone's submissions. And Aidan has just been an amazing partner. I mean, Aidan like literally graduated high, and not all the panelists know this. So Aidan, I was talking to Jesse this week, and we were talking about you, and he thought you were like 30 because you're so amazing. And I was like, dude, Aidan hadn't graduated high school when we started this panel. Like legit, Aidan graduated high school like literally like a month ago. So he's just awesome. I love it.
I love you too, Jess. And you know, I love that you say that, because what's funny about it is that, just like you were saying a few seconds before, you know, the book really, it's an unfiltered, honest kind of view from multiple people on different perspectives. And like Jess and I like to consider her to be a really good friend and whatnot. But there's definitely views that she has that I disagree with, and I'm sure that she has views that she may not agree with mine. But that's I find that, especially in the autistic community. I mean, everywhere you go in life, there's always going to be factions. There's always going to be, you know, I agree, I disagree, whatever. But I've seen some of the factions and some of the division in the autistic community. And sometimes, you know, it's great to have opinions, but there are sometimes, I think, an unnecessary level of divisiveness that sometimes occurs. And I've seen that in the autistic community. And I think that this book is really going to try to bridge the gap and really kind of open the door to a bunch of perspectives, and have the overall conclusion being, you know, at the end of the day, autism is a large spectrum, and there's a lot of unknowns to it. But with that being said, as I said just a second ago about the perspectives and everything like that, I absolutely, Monica, I absolutely love you. But I mean, for me, this is, I mean, when I was really young, right, I don't really want to do that type of thing anymore, because I'm busy, and because of the fact that I don't have enough time, or a bunch of other things. And it might be because I, you know, do it to try to avoid social interaction. But I used to be a lot more socially oriented. In other words, when I was younger, I used to really want to hang out with people. And there was a lot of rejection with that. And it was unfortunate. And the reason why it was unfortunate was because here's a guy, young kid, all he wants is really a friend. And I'm in a climate where I live that is very, it's gotten much better, but at that time, there were some tolerance issues and whatnot. So, and there was still that lack of understanding of what autism is. You know, they called that PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental disorder, in other words specified. They didn't really have a grasp of what autism really was.
Aidan, you know what professionals call that? Like, so the teachers, so for the PDD-NOS, and I don't know if you've ever heard this joke, but whenever, as a professional, I used to get this label up until 2013 when it was still a diagnosis. We used to say it stood for pediatrician didn't diagnosis.
I never heard that before, but it's true. It's a generic, I'm not sure what's going on. There's something there. I don't have the right information. He's not this, he's not that. Let's just call it a day. But as we became more educated and more involved as to what autism was, we found some common traits, not seen in every child, but we saw some common traits. And one trait, and Rich, I really have a lot of sympathy for your situation, and as well as Lisa, because there's a culture of socialization, not just when you set the kid up for the play date, you're essentially trying to make sometimes a new friends. I mean, I don't know what situations or what type of work, but I mean, you know, you hear all these stories about, let's say, you know, there might be a stay-at-home mom and whatnot, and there might be another stay-at-home mom, and, you know, you're setting your child up for a play date. And then it's like, you know what, I want another friend too. I want to like sip wine and have, you know, quinoa in like the middle of the afternoon or something. Like I want somebody to do that with. So
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm vegan and I don't even have quinoa in the middle of the afternoon.
I keep hearing that's the thing that women do or moms do. They love like quinoa or red wine. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I keep hearing.
I do love red wine. So I actually, it's not on camera, but like when I'm off camera, I usually do have a glass of red wine at like by 8 o'clock at night in front of me.
Here we go with the massive overgeneralizations again.
Well, it's not a massive. I understand why you think that. Well, I'm not trying to overgeneralize. What I'm trying to say is that there are some people that really want, what they want is they want to make a friend with respect to, you know, when you, let's say you're a parent or whatever, you call up Tommy's mom and be like, hey, you know, can Tommy, you know, hang out with John today or whatever? And it's like, sure, and whatnot. But what about, where does that leave you? Like, is it just like a transactional thing, or like do you want to like develop a rapport relationship with the mom? I think 9 times out of 10 the mom really does want to, unless you really are busy and you just like, hey, can you hang out with him? I have to work late, or there's that. But I think that a lot of times there's that socialization that is important. And I think that a fear that some parents may have is that if you say that your child's autistic, the child's chances, number one, the child's chances are going to go down. They're going to go down because they're not going to want to play with them. They're going to think he's going to be some piece of work, he's going to scream, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. And they're worried. They're worried that, it's going to be a disaster. And then when they try to talk to the mom or whatever, the other parent that they're trying to make this relationship, there's that fear that they're not going to really, there's not going to be a good development. There's not going to be a good rapport. There's adults want friends too, and a great way to make friends and whatnot is, setting up a play day, getting involved with school or whatever. That's why they have PTO. That's why they have lots of types of organizations like that. But when it comes to the label and the warning label, I don't find that I think it's very inappropriate to kind of call it as a warning label, because I think that all children should have warnings, because all children have the ability to break something. I've definitely, I mean, I remember when I was 5 years old, and it's a little weird or whatever, my brother and I, we would, when the neighbors were gone or whatever, and not to be malicious, we weren't like troublemakers or whatever, we would get large rocks and we would like throw it, like smash it on their driveway to see like it like crack or whatever. So like and my brother was neurotypical, so like all people, all kids especially have warning labels. But what I do think is important is it's very possible that, let's say you call up a parent, or you're in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, whatever. There is something to get a phone book list. You get the list of all the kids, classmates. That's happened to me, where it's a list of every kid's name, and it's their mom's name, or it's their dad's name, or mother, father, whatever it may be, and they have their email, their phone number. That sometimes happens, but there's ways to connect. And let's say you go and you call the mom up, and you say, hey, would you want to, hang out? And would you want to, you want to come over or whatever? We can have a cup of coffee and they can play or whatever like that, and start that churning of the friendship off and whatnot for the kids and for the adults. There's going to be a possibility, and that this has happened before. And Lisa, I think, alluded to that when she said, some people don't want to associate and stuff. They say everything's fine, this seems normal and everything like that. Everything's fine. And then they do a complete backpedal. I have a dentist appointment. It's my brother's father's cousin's uncle's wedding. I can't make it. Make up a million stories when you say that my child's autistic. Because unfortunately, that's a turnoff for a lot of people. And that's something that's really unfortunate. They find it to be an inconvenience, a burden. They find it to be something where you're going to have to supervise them. You're going to have to really, really ensure that there's not a meltdown, there's not this, there's not that. And so by telling a parent, your mom or whatever, if they're not able to accept that, or if you find yourself, you think that sometimes they're blatant, but sometimes there's this inconspicuous, they're trying to be nice with it, but they kind of just, they make up all these stories and everything like that. That really, to me, I mean, kids can make their own choices, but if the child doesn't have necessarily that capability of saying, I choose you to be my friend, they're really not sure what's going on, they need to, figure things out and whatnot, you can say to yourself, you know what, I'm sure that the kid might be lovely, but sometimes that type of intolerance that I'm experiencing from mother sometimes rubs off on their children or father or whatever like that. Maybe find somebody else to play with for the time being, and then when they get older, they can kind of, choose what they want to do. The point is that I think that it's very, I shouldn't say very irresponsible, but I think that it's a right thing to do because it's not, having autism isn't a label, it's not a part of you, but it is something that directly impacts you as a whole. I think that that's very fair to say. And so it's not a lie, but by starting off by being completely upfront and saying, I have autism, or my child has autism, rather, I think that that is a very brave and a very, very positive thing to do, because that right off the bat is elevating the friendship level. And it's saying, I can be authentic and I can say something to the mom that is sometimes a little bit sensitive for me to think about or for me to talk about. I can say that I'm choosing to elevate the conversation, or I'm choosing to also be responsible and letting them know that if my child throws something, or if my child, whatever it may be, it's really because of this. Instead of not telling them they have autism, and then what happens is the mom was like, hey, Jimmy, threw this, and then your response is, oh, well, he was just upset, he was blah, 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 blah. It gets to the point where there's almost that level of authenticity that is questioned. I think that it is a really great thing, and it's hard to do. I mean, I think that there's also security issues for parents. You don't know. I mean, some parents, and I'm not saying that's you or Lisa at all, Rich and Lisa, but there are some parents, and I have had many clients where they don't like saying the word autism. They'll say that their child is special, or I once heard a client tell me that his son was autistic. He called him theatrical, which was, so there's ridiculous. So there's still that level of not always wanting to get there. They're not sure what to do. So I think that overall, if you're, let's say, having a play date, and I can go on and on because I'm very passionate about this, but if you really are having a play date or whatever, at least at the beginning, be upfront. And sometimes, and a lot of times in the past, I definitely would agree with the assumption that, there was a lot of intolerance. But I mean, I worked at a public school for a while in a generalized and special education teaching classroom or whatever. These kids see a lot, and a lot of it is far worse than just the kids sometimes saying things on and on and on. They see sometimes kids throw things or having to be taken out of the room and whatnot. And so, but there's a new level of tolerance that I think that each generation has garnered. It seems to me overall, despite some of the bad apples that we see, it seems to me as though we're becoming a little bit more tolerant due to the experiences and due to the more types of people we're allowing to cavort around with us. So I'd say the overall recommendation would be, Rich and Lisa, that you don't have to tell them, you don't have to go back to the year of the flood, give them this whole big story about I went to the children's specialized hospital, this happened. You could just say, hey, so my child, just to let you know, so there's no surprises, my child has autism. He really loves this. He's really unique in a lot of ways. He loves zoos, animals, whatever. But he also sometimes has a hard time with this, that, or whatever. That's a courtesy to the parent. And here's what it is. Here's what really it amounts to. Let's say you have allergies, right? And I'm not comparing, that, but let's say you have a peanut allergy, right? Things happen, sometimes, different foods or whatever. You go to the mom, do you just say, you know what, I don't want this to be a possible inconvenience. I don't want this to be a turn off or anything like that. So I'm not going to tell her that my son has a peanut allergy. I find that very equivalent almost to the fact of having autism, where what it is, in my opinion, is where by saying that, that's not only a courtesy, but that's also something to be aware of and to make sure that I'm doing the best I can as the person that may be facilitating the play date, the mom, to make sure that I'm aware that sometimes things might be a problem. And it's a way to know that the child is especially comfortable and safe by knowing their triggers, by knowing their strengths, by knowing whatever it is that really makes them unique and special and amazing. I would tell the mom. So it depends obviously on the situation, but I think that really kind of being upfront, and if you get turned off, if they are turned off by that, that's a shame, and it's a real shame, and it's their loss. Because what I can tell you is the having an autistic friend is one of the most amazing friendships you can have, because I like to think, and I like to think I'm a very loyal person with autism. Some of the people with autism are some of the nicest, most loyal, kind people that you'll ever meet. So by them having their biases and prejudices in place and saying it's going to be hard, inconvenience, blah, 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 it's really their loss. And then you just, you say there's plenty of other fish in the sea. So that's my spiel. That's what I would, that's what I'm thinking. But I think it's a really great question, Rich. And I wish both you and Lisa good luck. Yeah.
I love that, Aidan. And actually, I was going to use the exact same analogy of an allergy. And I started talking about something else and I kind of forgot I wanted to say that. But I was literally like, that exact same analogy came to my mind, which is why I love you, because we just think so much alike. Even though I love Monica, is just equally, and we think opposite.
I feel bad though, because I felt like I saw Monica kind of seething when I was saying all this, and I was like, oh, come on, man.
It's all about diversity, and you can't, and what we stand for here in this community is about accepting and loving each other for their differences. So that's just part of it, is that we'll have different opinions. Absolutely. And that's why it's important for a parent to hear different perspectives. Because there really is no right and wrong answer, right? I can tell you my opinion, and Rich, you said, your wife has a different opinion, and you have a different opinion, and Monica has a different opinion than me, and than Aidan. And so it's okay to have a different opinion. Nobody really knows for sure, right? The truth is, unless your child can advocate for themselves, there really is no correct answer. If your child is able to say, let's say they're 10, and they were able to say, hey, I want this person to know, or I don't want this person to know. That's their prerogative. Monica chooses not to tell certain people that she's autistic. She can. That's her choice, right? And I think Lisa said it perfectly, is that, at a certain point, you're making choices for your child. And all you can do is do the best thing you can and make the best choices you can. And just, Rich, I know that your son is going to love you for the fact that you're here. And any parent who's watching this video, whether you're here live, whether you're watching on YouTube, your child is so lucky to have you, because so many parents don't care enough to sit in for an hour, more than an hour, and watch a video to listen, to find out how can I be a better parent. Your child is going to love you and thank you and be so grateful one day for everything you're doing for them. You're an amazing parent. And, the truth is that all you can do is the best you can. And every parent makes the best choices they can with the information they have. And my job is just to give you that information and to respect the choices you make. Because the truth is, it's personal. And there is no right, there is no wrong answer. Oftentimes we have 8 panelists, 6 panelists, you'll hear 6, 8 different answers. And that's the truth, is that there is no right, wrong.
Yeah, what do you connect with more in your situation? Kind of like, what's your perspective?
Yeah, and every child's different. There are children who are more like, and I don't like using this terminology, but and I don't like the terminology high functioning versus low functioning, but there's children whose life are more impacted by autism and who's less impacted by autism, or whose symptoms are more visible to other people, and people whose symptoms are less visible to other people, and they're more personally impacted by it. And the reality of it is that how you would make a decision may be different depending upon those things. So as a parent, all you can do is the best you can.